I don't curse people. I just give things back to them. Good evening and welcome to The Ghost Collector. For as long as I can remember, I've been collecting stories that don't fit. Ghosts, UFOs, strange creatures, glitches in reality, the unexplained and the deeply unsettling. For decades, I've sought out these stories, listened to the people who experienced them, and written them down. I'm Scott Weimer, and this is The Ghost Collector. Our first story tonight is one of those accounts where the facts alone are unsettling enough. The names have been changed, and the parts involving curses or folk magic are left exactly where they belong, in the gray area between coincidence, rumor, and fear. But the apartment was real, the violence was real, the deaths were real, and so was the thing left outside the woman's door. This is Kelly's story, and it's called The Red Nail and the Feather, and it's told by voice actor Monica Weimer.
I was 18 when I got my first apartment. That sounds so much more adult than it actually was. In reality, I was barely making it. I was still a teenager, still trying to figure out how to pay bills, eat like someone who had a business, living on her own. Top ramen, hard-boiled eggs, toast if we had bread. But at that time, it felt like freedom. I moved in with two girlfriends. We'll call them Sarah and Jill. Sarah and I both worked part-time, so we weren't exactly rolling in money. Jill, though, had a better job, and because of that, she took the master bedroom. It had its own bathroom and quite a bit more space, so she paid a larger portion of the rent. That was the only reason we could afford the place, and for about 6 months it worked. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We were young, we had mismatched furniture, cheap dishes, and that feeling you have at 18 when you think being broke is just part of the adventure. One day, Jill came home and told us she had gotten another job in another town. She was moving out. And just like that, the whole arrangement collapsed. Sarah and I tried to find another roommate, but we couldn't find anyone who wanted to move in with us. So we started looking for another apartment. With our income, our options were very limited. Very limited. The place we ended up finding was not in a terrible neighborhood exactly, but the apartment complex itself had a reputation. People knew it, people talked about it. It was one of those places where the rent was low for a reason. The apartment was actually larger than we expected, and inside it was not bad. It had enough space for two of us. The layout worked, the price worked. So we took it. I remember trying to convince myself that the reputation was probably exaggerated. It wasn't. The complex had a strange mix of people. There were regular renters, young people like us, working people, and a few international students or former students who seemed to move in and out of the place. It was not all bad, not at all, but there were certain people you learned to avoid right away. And one of them lived directly above us. I'm going to call him Sam. I recognized him from high school. I did not know him personally, but I remembered him. He had been from another country, somewhere in Africa. I remember him mostly because he had been a soccer player and a foreign student at the school. At one point back then, I had mentioned him to a friend and said something like, "He seems nice." And my friend immediately said, "No, he's not nice." That stuck with me because it surprised me. Most of the foreign exchange students I had known were friendly, or at least polite, but she said he was mean, very mean. That was all I knew about him, until I lived underneath him. Sam and the guys he hung around were always on the stairs, always. They sat there like they owned the building. If you were coming or going, you had to pass them. They did not move out of the way, they just watched you, and I hated it. I hated walking up to my own apartment and feeling like I had to get past a checkpoint. At first, I would just nod and keep moving. I did not want trouble. I did not want to make eye contact for too long. I did not want him to remember me from school. If he did recognize me, he never said so. Then one night, everything changed. I had gone to bed early. I remember lying there in the dark, trying to fall asleep, when I started hearing muffled sounds from upstairs. At first, I thought it was just voices. Then I listened more carefully. It was a man's voice, low, angry, then a woman's voice, then crying. I lay there completely still, staring into the dark, trying to convince myself I was misunderstanding what I was hearing. Then I heard a smack, and the woman went quiet. A few seconds later, his voice started again. I knew then he was hurting her. I was alone in the apartment. Sarah was not home. I think she was at her boyfriend's, but I don't remember for sure. I just remember suddenly feeling very young, very alone, and very aware that the man upstairs was dangerous. I did not know what to do. I was too scared to call the police, and I was scared not to. Finally, I called. I told them what I was hearing, and I asked if I could remain anonymous. I was terrified that if he knew it was me, I would have to walk past him the next day or the next night or any time I came home from work. After I called, I tiptoed to the front of the apartment and watched through the blinds until the police arrived. It felt like it took forever. When they finally came, I stayed hidden. I watched the lights outside. I listened to the footsteps on the stairs. I heard voices above me, but not clearly enough to understand. Eventually, the police left. I never saw the woman come outside. The next morning, I left for work as quietly as possible. I was hoping not to see anybody, and I didn't. But when I came home later that day, Sam and several of the men he was always with were sitting on the stairs. I had always assumed they were from the same country he was. They spoke quietly amongst themselves. Then they were silent when they saw me, waiting. At least that's how it felt. They were all looking at me, and the woman was with him. He had his arm draped around her neck in a way that might have looked affectionate from far away, but it didn't feel affectionate. It felt possessive. It felt like a warning. Her face looked bruised. I do not remember exactly what he said to me as I passed. I wish I did. I only remember the tone. It was not friendly, and I knew that he knew. After that, I was terrified of him. I started timing when I came and went, listening before opening the door. I hated hearing footsteps on the stairs above us. I hated knowing that he was up there. And then things got worse. One weekend, Sarah and I were home, and we heard shouting outside, not just arguing, a real commotion. We looked out and saw a fight breaking out near the building. Sam and some of his friends were involved, along with several other men. It moved fast. People were yelling, shoving, swinging. And then Sam ran upstairs. For a second, I thought he was leaving. He wasn't. He came back down carrying a small charcoal barbecue. It was hot, still burning, and he dumped it over another man's head. I can still picture the motion of it, even though the whole scene was chaos. Later, we heard that someone had also been stabbed during the fight more than once. Within minutes, the entire complex was full of sirens, police cars, firefighters, and ambulance. Sarah and I were standing in our little side yard watching everything unfold when a police officer walked by on his way towards the stairs. I recognized him. He was a friend of my father's. He recognized me too. He stopped and said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I live here," and his face changed. He looked toward the building, then back at me and said, "Be careful." That was all. The next day, my dad called. The officer had told him what had happened, and my father wanted for me to understand exactly how bad the situation was. He said the complex was dangerous. He said the people upstairs were dangerous. He said that I needed to be careful, which was true. But it did not help much because I was already living there. He did tell me one thing that made me feel better. Sam had been arrested, and he was going to be in jail for at least a few days. For the first time in weeks, I could walk in and out of my apartment without feeling my chest tightening. During those few days, something shifted in the building. People started talking. Our building had maybe 8 apartments, and most of us kept to ourselves until then. But after the fight, people came outside. Women who had only nodded at each other before started comparing stories. There was a young woman around our age, I'll call her Tina, She lived in one of the other units and had seen some of what happened. Then there was an older woman who lived downstairs. I'll call her Marlene. She was probably in her early 50s, maybe mid-50s. At 18, anyone over 40 seemed old to me, so it's hard to say now. But she had the look of a woman who had been through some things and was not afraid of much anymore. Marlene was not shy. She was angry. Not shocked, not scared the way Sarah and I were scared, angry. She'd already had run-ins with Sam, and she clearly hated him. At some point, she invited Sarah and I to her apartment. The first thing I noticed was that her place felt different. Not dirty, not even strange at first, just heavy. The lights were low. There were candles everywhere. There was dark artwork on the walls, old frames, religious-looking images mixed with things I did not recognize. Dried flowers, little bowls, bundles of herbs hanging in the kitchen. A smell like candle smoke, old perfume, and something bitter. I remember glancing at Sarah, and I could tell she felt it too. The place was witchy. That was the only word I could use to describe it. Marlene told us we needed to look out for each other. She said women in that building had to pay attention because men like Sam counted on everyone being too scared to speak up. I told her about the night I had called the police, about hearing him hit his girlfriend upstairs, about seeing the girl the next day with bruises on her face. Marlene got very quiet. Then she said something like, "He thinks he gets to do whatever he wants." Her voice had changed. It was lower, colder. I remember her standing near the table, touching the edge of the candle holders with her finger. She said, "Men like that always think the world belongs to them." Then she looked at me and said something I've never forgotten. "I don't curse people," she said. "I just give things back to them." Nobody laughed. Nobody asked her what she meant. There was something about the way she said it that made it clear we were not supposed to. After that, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. Sam came back from jail. His friends came back to the stairs. The girlfriend was still around, sometimes. Everyone went back to walking softly and minding their own business. But I could not stop thinking about what Marlene said. I don't curse people, I just give things back to them. It sounded ridiculous in daylight. At night, underneath Sam's apartment, it did not sound ridiculous at all. Then, not long after he came back, I ran into Tina outside. She said, "Did you hear?" I said, "Hear what?" She looked toward the stairs before answering. "Sam's dead." At first, I thought I had misunderstood her. She told me he had drowned in a river, a local river not far away. The details were fuzzy. Someone said he had been swimming. Someone else said he fell in. Someone said alcohol was involved. Someone said it happened fast. I don't know what was true. I only know that he was alive and then he wasn't. I hate saying this, but my first feeling was relief. Not sadness, not shock. Relief. I thought of the woman upstairs. I thought about the fight. I thought about the man with burns. The man who had gotten stabbed. I thought about the way Sam had stared at me from the stairs with his arm around his girlfriend's bruised neck. Then I thought of Marlene. I don't curse people. I just give things back to them. I did not believe in curses. At least, I would have just told you that I didn't. But after Sam drowned, I started avoiding Marlene's door. Not because she'd ever been unkind to me. She hadn't. She actually tried to protect us in her own way. But I could not shake the feeling something had happened. Something had moved through that building, and Marlene had either known it was coming or had helped push it along. The complex did get quieter after Sam died. Some of the guys who used to hang out on the stairs were still around, but not like before. They did not seem as loud. They did not seem as comfortable. The whole building felt like it was holding its breath. Then Marlene died, too. Again, I heard it from Tina. I do not remember exactly how Marlene died. I don't know if anyone really knew. It might have been health-related. It might have been sudden. It might have been something completely ordinary, but by then nothing in that building felt ordinary. Some of those same men were still around after Sam died. They didn't hang out as much and they weren't as loud, but I would still see them near the stairs or crossing the parking lot. And after Marlene died, I couldn't help thinking about them, not because I knew anything, but because in that building, everybody seemed to know something about everybody else. A few days later, I walked past Marlene's apartment. Her door was closed. The little alcove outside her entrance was empty except for one thing. There was a red nail tacked into the wall near her door. Hanging from it was a single bird feather. I stopped when I saw it. It was not a decoration. It did not look accidental. It looked placed. The nail was bright red, not rusty red, painted red, deliberately red. And the feather hung from it like a warning, or a marker, or a message meant for someone who knew how to read it. I didn't know who left it. I didn't know what it meant. But it looked deliberate, and because of everything that had happened, my mind went to the men upstairs, Sam's friends, the ones who had known him, the ones who might have believed Marlene had done something to him. Maybe it had nothing to do with Sam. Maybe it had nothing to do with Marlene. Maybe it was just something someone left behind, and my young, terrified mind connected the pieces because I wanted them to connect. But I remember standing there in that hallway, looking at that red nail and that feather, and feeling absolutely certain that whatever Marlene had sent out had come back. Or that someone had sent something back to her. We only lived in that apartment for about 6 months. My parents already knew the place was rough, but after the fight, the police, and everything that followed, they moved faster on a plan they had already been considering. They bought a small rental house, and Sarah and I moved there. It was not glamorous, but it was safe. No men sitting on the stairs, no muffled crying through the ceiling, no candles burning behind a neighbor's door, no red nail and feather waiting in the alcove. Years later, I still think about that apartment. I think about how young we were, how badly we wanted to be independent, how quickly independence turned into fear. And I think about Marlene. I do not know what she was. Maybe she was just an angry woman with candles and a flair for saying unsettling things. Maybe Sam's death was a coincidence. Maybe Marlene's death was too. But there are some coincidences that do not feel like coincidences when you are standing close to them. They feel like a door opening. They feel like something stepping through. They feel like a woman in a dark apartment saying very calmly, "I don't curse people, I just give things back to them." Then proving it, or paying for it, or both.
Some stories end with answers. Others end with a mark on the wall, a feather hanging from a red nail, and the feeling that whatever happened there was never meant to be fully understood. And that's where we'll leave this one. And now, before we move into our next full segment, I want to open the file on another one of our lost ghost stories. These are the shorter ones, the fragments, the stories people tell almost casually. One strange moment, one impossible detail, one thing they heard or saw that never quite fit back into the normal world. This next one came from a friend of mine. No apparition, no dramatic haunting, no long history of a cursed building. Just a quiet thrift store, a man waiting for his wife, and a voice that came from nowhere. This is Lost Ghost Stories, and this one's called Who Are You? A friend once told me about something that happened while he was shopping with his wife in a thrift store. It was a small shop, mostly women's clothing and housewares, so he was doing the uncomfortable husband shuffle, wandering from rack to rack, pretending to be interested in old dishes, picture frames, and costume jewelry while his wife looked around. The store was quiet. There was no television, no radio playing, no men that he could see, just a few women browsing and the soft rustle of hangers moving on metal racks. Then, from very close by, he heard a man's voice.
Who are you?
He turned immediately, but there was no one there. No man standing behind him, no customer at the end of the aisle, no employee coming out of a back room. Nothing that could explain it. He stood there for a few seconds, waiting, but the voice did not speak again. When he found his wife and asked if she'd heard anything, she said no. And that was it. No ghost, no footsteps, no second voice. Just one impossible question in the middle of a quiet thrift store. Thank you to Tony for that lost ghost story. A voice in an empty thrift store is the kind of story that doesn't give you much to hold on to. There's no figure, no history, no explanation. Just a couple words that seem to come from nowhere. And maybe that's what makes those little lost stories so unsettling. They feel less like complete hauntings and more like brief moments when something looks back. Our next story has that same feeling, but it comes from much earlier in life, from the dark bedroom of a 5-year-old child, a toy box at the far end of the room, and 2 visitors who may have stepped out of a dream and may have left something behind. This is Shane's story, and it's called Melvin's Robot. The first strange thing I can remember happened when I was about 5 years old. And I know how that sounds. 5's pretty young. Memories from that age are not always reliable. They come back in bits and pieces: a room, a shadow, a feeling, a color, a toy. Sometimes you're never completely sure whether you're remembering the event itself or remembering all the times you remembered it later. But this one has stayed with me. Not because it was dramatic, not because anything jumped out at me, not because there was some terrifying face at the window or a voice whispering in the dark. It stayed with me because it was so simple. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was in my room, in bed, and everything had that strange nighttime appearance rooms have when you're little. The furniture's familiar, not quite right. The corners seem deeper. Clothes on the chair look like people. Toys on the floor seem closer than they were before. At the far end of my room, I had a toy box. It was like a round barrel with some sort of colored paper on it. That was where my eyes went when I woke up. And as I looked across the darkened room, I saw 2 people walk into my bedroom. One of them looked like Santa Claus. That's the only way my 5-year-old mind could understand him. He was an older white man with a beard, or at least that's how I remember him. I don't recall a bright red suit or anything cartoonish. He did have red on, though. He didn't look like Santa Claus from a department store photograph. It was more that my young mind saw an old bearded man wearing a red jacket or shirt and placed him into the only category that made sense, which was Santa Claus. The second man was black. I remember that clearly too. Not in a frightening or threatening way. It was simply part of the memory. There were 2 men in my room. One looked like Santa Claus, and the other was a black man. They didn't speak to me. They didn't approach the bed. They didn't seem surprised that I was awake. I do remember them both looking over at me, and maybe even talking softly to each other. They walked directly to the toy box, and one of them placed something inside of it. A toy. That was what I thought it was anyway. Something being delivered. Something left for me. Then the 2 men turned and left the room, looking at me as they exited through my bedroom door. I don't remember calling out for my parents. I only remember lying there afterward, staring at the toy box. I could see the top of whatever they had placed inside. That was the part that made the experience feel real to me. Had I simply woke up and seen 2 figures then fallen back asleep, maybe I would have dismissed the entire thing as a dream. A strange dream, but still a dream. But I kept waking up. All through the night, I would drift off and then open up my eyes again. And every time I looked toward the end of the room. And every time it was still there. The top of the object remained visible above the edge of my toy box. Same place, same shape, the same small piece of something catching just enough light for me to know that it had not disappeared. I remember waiting for morning. At 5 years old, I still believed that adults, or Santa Claus, or whoever these visitors were, could enter a child's room at night and leave something behind. But another part of me understood that something was wrong. Morning finally came. The room changed back into itself, the corners lost their depth, the furniture was only furniture again. The toy box sat at the end of the room exactly where it always had. And I walked toward it. I expected reality to correct itself. I thought that I would discover one of my regular toys resting at an odd angle, maybe something I had forgotten putting there, something ordinary that looked unfamiliar in the dark. Instead, there was a toy I had never seen before. It wasn't new. It was a wind-up metal robot packed inside an old cardboard box. For a moment, I was excited. Santa had really left me a toy. But as I lifted the box from the toy chest, the excitement began to fade. The cardboard was worn and soft around the edges. The corners were crushed, and the printed images on the outside had faded with age. Looking back now, I would guess that the toy dated from sometime in the early 1950s. Even as a child, I understood that that was old and used, and that presented several problems. Why had Santa brought me a battered second-hand toy? And why had he brought it during the summer? And who was the other man that had come in the room with him? Still, it was a toy robot, and I wanted to see it work. I opened the box and pulled it free. The robot fit so tightly inside that it took me some time to get it out. Its metal body was scratched and dented. The paint had worn away in places, and the winding key protruded from its side. I turned the key and placed the robot on the floor, and it began to walk. Not smoothly. It moved with a loud mechanical clunk, rocking stiffly from side to side as it crossed the bedroom floor. The sound seemed much louder than something that small should have been able to make. By then, I had already begun trying to explain the night to myself. Maybe I had dreamed about the two men. Maybe my dad had placed the robot in the toy box after I fell asleep, and my mind had built a dream around it. That seemed like the most reasonable explanation. Except I was sure the box had not been there when I went to bed. At breakfast, I asked my parents where the robot had come from. Neither one of my parents knew what I was talking about. When I brought it out and showed them, they both denied putting it in my room. They seemed puzzled but not alarmed. They thought that maybe one of the neighborhood kids had left it at my house. I didn't tell them about the two men, and I for sure didn't mention Santa Claus. The boy who had lived next door was Ramon, and he and his sister Rosie were the only kids that ever came inside my house at that time. I showed him the robot, and I asked him whether it belonged to him, and he said no. We looked at the box together, looking for some clue about where it had come from. That was when Ramon noticed a faint name written in pencil across the bottom. The writing had nearly faded away. It was in cursive, the kind of handwriting that already looked old-fashioned to us. Together, we made out the name. Melvin. Neither of us knew anyone named Melvin. The name looked as though it had been written there many years before either one of us was born. After I told Ramon that the robot had simply appeared in my room, he said that he had seen someone in his own bedroom at night. Whether that was true, I don't know. He may have been frightened by my story. He may have wanted to contribute one of his own. We were both very young, and it happened over 50 years ago. What I do know is that no one ever claimed the robot. Years later, I asked my dad about it again, and he still insisted that he had not placed it in my room. And I believed him. He wasn't the kind of guy that would hold on to a secret that long. I never learned who Melvin was. I never found out how the robot reached my toy box. And strangely, I don't remember playing with it very much after that first morning. I remember winding it, I remember the loud clunk of its feet crossing the floor. But after that, the memory fades. And I don't know whatever happened to that robot. Maybe it was thrown away, maybe it disappeared during a move. Maybe it ended up at the bottom of another box and was forgotten. Or maybe, sometime after I'd stopped paying attention to it, the two nighttime visitors returned for the toy they had left behind and took Melvin's robot with them. Thanks to Shane for bringing that story back and helping me remember the details of that creepy little mystery. And before we close tonight, I want to leave you with something a little different. Not a submitted story, not exactly. A poem. Earlier in the episode, we told a story about an apartment building, a violent man, a woman downstairs, and the uneasy possibility that something had been sent out and then been sent back. The final piece lives in that same shadow. It's about rumor, punishment, old women, old fears, and what happens when people decide they know what a witch is. It's written by a good friend of mine who has spent years writing poetry that's equal parts folklore, memory, and dark imagination. He gave me permission to share this one with you tonight. This is called A Tale. Mischief past its temporary phase. Be mindful, witch, prolific in the ways. Confession falsely once weeded out. An ancient widow rumored often about. In beating down the door they'd brought her forth, and bound her to a post directed north. Some townsfolk in their skepticism stayed. From here the reconstruction starts to fade. It's said that ancient widow thus despised, ferocious summoned dogs to terrorize. Next by witch or rabid tooth commenced, till burned a post with bodies leaned against. Look twice on any ancient widowry. Do well be sure to weed it lawfully. That was A Tale, written by my friend Chris Islava. And that feels like the right place to leave this episode, with an old warning, a half-remembered legend, and the question that seems to follow so many of these stories. What do we really know about the things we fear? I'm Scott Weimer, and this has been The Ghost Collector. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys true paranormal stories. If you have a true paranormal story, or even a secondhand one that you'd like to share, you can reach out at scott@theghostcollector.com or by visiting theghostcollector.com. You can also use your phone's voice recorder to record your experience and email it to the show. For additional information, photos, and original sources related to tonight's stories, visit theghostcollector.com. If you have a real paranormal experience, maybe it's time to let someone collect it. Music and sound effects used in this episode were sourced from freesound.org and are licensed under Creative Commons Attribution. Full source details are available at theghostcollector.com. Thanks for listening.